Welcome to a new edition of the Neon Jazz interview series with jazz saxophonist Kris Allen. He grew up in Connecticut and went on to learn quite a bit with the legendary alto saxophonist Jackie Mclean, and that was at Hartford's Artist Collective. These days, he is promoting his second album as a leader, and it's 2016's Beloved, and it's a great listen. And he continues to be a very sought-after sideman as well. Over the years, he's worked with the best in the business, in the groups of Illinois Jacquet, Gerald Wilson, Helen Sung, the Mingus Dynasty, and so many other bands. He's got some great insights and a full jazz story. So get to know Kris and dig this interview, my friends.
So I'm going to go ahead and dive right in here. I know you're a very busy educator and musician, but give me an idea, in your own words, what's been going on with you lately?
In the media lately has been the release of this new record, Beloved, on Truth Revolution Records, and a whole bunch of different CD release kind of concerts and promotions, things we're doing. My group just had a week at Dizzy's Club Coca-Cola as part of the Jazz and Lincoln Center complex just this past week. And we have other events coming out later this summer and through the fall. My label, Truth Revolution Records, does a lot of cool things with I think it's an app called Periscope, where we put on live concerts that are streamed in real time over the internet. So I'll be doing one of those in August. Another concert at a club in Connecticut called The Ninth Note, also in August. But just a lot of, I don't know, I'm just enjoying this release, getting to talk to a lot of folks like yourself and play a lot with the group, so it's been fun.
So talk to me about Beloved. How do you feel about this album in the afterglow? Now that it's out and you've had time to promote, what do you think?
I was really happy with it. You know, these things take time. It was recorded about a year ago, and so any judgment or sense of happiness or dismay would have been mostly then. And I was really happy with it from the beginning. And in a lot of ways, it was the fulfillment of maybe some challenges I put to myself, it was the first project I ever did without a piano or without any really chords, and that was sort of a specific kind of compositional challenge I almost put to myself to sort of get away from thinking very piano-focused and striving for a unique sound in that way, and I was happy with how that came out. I was certainly happy with how all the guys in the band played the music, and I especially kind of wanted to make a project of really focusing on saxophone and two saxophones and just, playing those unison melodies and exploring the different ways that you could, even utilize just two horns. And I was really, thrilled with how Frank and I were able to kind of phrase together. So I've been really proud of the music for a long time, and then it's been very well received from folks all over. So that's obviously gratifying too. It's nice to, it's nice to know or just feel or perceive that people are giving you a listen and a thoughtful listen. Really, even if they're not crazy about it, but most of the people who I hear from really enjoy it. So that of course feels good.
Right on.
Yeah.
So I'm going to go back to the beginnings of your life here, growing up in Connecticut. Mm-hmm. Talk to me about your childhood and how you got into jazz.
Let me think. I played piano from very, very early on. My mother is a musician, studied organ, was a church organist, and my brother and I both started piano lessons at a very young age, and so we had sort of a basic music aptitude and kind of always music happening. Jazz was something that was real particular to my town when I was in West Hartford, Connecticut. I think I started playing saxophone just because I wanted to be in the band with my friends, and saxophone, I'm not sure there was that much behind that decision. I just thought it looked cool. But once I kind of got a hold of that and really started to enjoy the instrument, there's quite a tradition in the high school that I ended up attending of really excellent jazz groups, and so that energy kind of propelled me on. I think for most kids, if they're going to get passionate about something when they're 13 and 14, it's going to largely be because of their peers and something they do all together. And certainly, all my friends, strangely enough, we were all into playing jazz music, and then And the other side of the coin was Jackie Mclean, who lived just across town and had an arts organization in the north end of Hartford that was, it's called the Artist Collective, still going strong today, and it's sort of like an after-school program that schools people in all the arts of the African diaspora. So you've got jazz, but different kinds of dance, all different kinds of music, African drumming, and so I would go there for after-school programs, but also for things over the summer. I think really through meeting, I was real into being in the school band, and that was a fun thing, but really through meeting Jackie and also the folks who were in his band who might have been only 10 or 15 years older than me, that's when I began to sort of conceptualize doing this for a lifetime or making a career out of music, just being around all these kind of young professionals. So, that's what really did it for me.
So in those early days when you were listening to jazz, what albums really blew you away? What really got you going?
That's a great question. There's one I remember early on. I mean, I listened to a lot of things. I always joke about, when kids are of a certain age, they might have, distant relatives who might not see them very often and just know, like, what they're into. And so, some kids, they just get known as, like, the soccer kid. And I think after a time I was known as the kid that plays saxophone, so people would be giving me all kinds of saxophone discs, maybe like, the greatest hits of saxophone jazz, or Kenny G, or David Sanborn, or Charlie Parker, and I took all that stuff in and was impressed with it maybe, but I think the first record I really remember falling in love with was a Blue Note record, Lee Morgan, The Gigolo. I think my friend, a good friend of mine, Josh Wittenberg, had that on a cassette, and we listened to that a lot, and we kind of, migrated there from that, just kind of fell in love with all the, the Blue Note catalog, more Lee Morgan records. Remember Joe Henderson, Mode for Joe. Eventually I made the connection that this guy that I knew, Jackie Mclean, was also on some of these records and played with the same people. So, listen to his records, but also stuff he did more modern day. I remember being super into a record he put out in the very early 90s called Dynasty. Those were the sounds that I really gravitated to, that Blue Note era stuff. And then from there I kind of worked forwards and backwards. Became super into Cannonball Adderley. I became super into Kenny Garrett, and then eventually even went, now I would say, Parker is my favorite, and I'm and Lester Young is up there too. I think usually I see this pattern happen with a lot of young people. You kind of maybe gravitate to music that happens in the 50s, but then work your way sort of forward and backward in time simultaneously. So I'm not that weird in that regard.
Yeah, no, absolutely not. No, I hear that all the time.
Yeah.
The one thing I did want to ask you about Jackie before we move on is, how long did it take for you to get over those butterflies of being around him?
There really weren't butterflies because I didn't really get it. It was kind of a simple thing where I had a saxophone teacher in middle school, a guy, great teacher, a guy I learned a lot from, a guy named George Ventrelli, sort of a local Connecticut guy. I went away to summer camp and he had a heart attack and passed away, and so it was, he came back from camp and, mom and dad said, oh, your teacher died, we got to find another teacher. And to me it was just like, oh, this Jackie Mclean guy's around, like let's, I should probably sort of investigate him, and I didn't really get sort of the different echelon that represented, and then I met him, and he was, to me, just this guy that ran this cool school that I was part of, and but I mean certainly, folks at the Artist Collective did treat him with a degree of reverence or respect that was unusual and was interesting, but I guess by the time I really appreciated sort of his historical importance, I already knew him too well. I already been at his house, and I guess I don't really remember butterflies in that way.
I gotcha.
Yeah.
So let me ask you this before we depart childhood. Did you always know you were going to be a musician, or were there other things you were thinking about?
Well, I'm sure there was other things. I don't remember specifics, but yeah, I'm sure I was hoping to be some kind of athlete for a few years in there. The music thing probably, I don't know. I think if you had talked to me when I was, maybe by the time I was 15, I would have said I would be a musician. But before then, probably wanted to play basketball, or I don't know. I'm blanking. I'm sure my parents could probably fill me in on some of the other things. I joke now that now I have my own elementary age kids, and it's funny how there's certain ages where every kid wants to be a veterinarian, and then like the next year every kid wants to be something else. They kind of tend to go in waves, and I'm sure I was probably like that too.
Let me ask you this. You traveled extensively, obviously playing in New York, around the U.S., and around the world. What does traveling do for you to enhance your music writing and delivery? What does it do for your music brain?
It's a little bit different, honestly. I mean, I do love to travel, and I just love it in and of itself. It's so great to meet new musicians and play in different places. And some places you go, I was in Korea recently, and there just seemed to be just a lot happening, a lot of young musicians, and every scene is great. And so and there's a specific group of guys who live in Korea that I actually hope to keep on collaborating with. So that's a fruitful thing. Although I will say that I'm afraid that compared to maybe 50 or 60 years ago, like when you see sort of later Duke Ellington, when he's traveling the world on State Department tours, right? He'll go to the Far East and then come back and write a suite. He'll go to South America, come back and write a suite. And I mean, you're probably familiar with the music, but it's such wonderful music, and he manages to sort of depict those cultures in a way that doesn't cheapen them, or it doesn't sound cliched, but they're wonderful. I'm honestly kind of afraid that because of the way things are with our culture and the internet and globalization, I'm afraid that experience is only available in a less potent way now, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Like that we, in any major city in the world, you're gonna find similar things than you would to New York. I'm not saying that there's nothing new to be out there, but I think that's a good way to put it. That experience is a little less potent. And on the other side of the coin, all the musics of the world are pretty much available to anybody, even without getting on a plane. But it does, I do think about that sometimes, sort of the lost romance of that. If I could even, a time when I could even, you don't have to get in a plane, or I can get into a car and drive from the East Coast to Kansas City and get out of my car and hear something that I just would not have heard had I not taken the trip. That's pretty cool. With all that as a sort of asterisk, I'm sure any experience you have that's meaningful, finds a way into your music. But I'm struggling to think of one specific, sort of musical idea or rhythm or musical device that I picked up directly through being somewhere that wasn't home.
No, I like that tangent you went on. That's really good. I like that definitely. So I'm going to stay in this vein of musicians and playing and touring. You've been in the groups of Illinois Jacquet, Gerald Wilson. I mean, I could go on and on. Gary Smulian, Kendrick Oliver's New Life. What do you learn when you get around these big outfits with these individuals that have all this mileage behind them? What do you learn from being with those groups?
I mean, there's something you learn from, of the ones you mentioned. For example, well, Illinois Jacquet was someone that I was only with for a very short amount of time at the very end of his life, and from him, it was very interesting to see the Flying Home solo, the iconic solo on the Lionel Hampton recording way back in the 30s that really put him on the map. it was interesting to see him play that every night, and we even had a chordal, like a saxophone arranged version of it, and this one solo sort of defined him, but he wasn't shying away from it, and he loved to play it, and it didn't really matter to him that it was the same thing as the last time he played, and decades upon decades. That was, I'm not sure if I can even crystallize an exact lesson from that, but that was interesting to see in that it was so different from the way that I was used to thinking about playing, or in the circles that I'd been in. It's just fascinating to see people who conceptualize and expect and appreciate different things about the music than you do. Kendrick Oliver, out of those lists, so Kendrick Oliver is, he's another young guy like me. He's more of a peer, and that band hasn't played in a few years, but it was one of the more long ranging things I did, maybe for about 10 years, and we used to play a lot of different places, and it was a challenge in that, but a fun challenge because repertoire didn't change that much. We had a couple different concerts, but we played the same tunes. It was mostly originals, but kind of based on a 50s bassy kind of sound, and that was a fun and rewarding experience, just to play the same things again and again and again, and that band would even improvise charts on the stage. We just like play a blues, and then I think very much in keeping with sort of a Count Basie in Kansas City tradition of just sections creating riffs spontaneously and then layering them, and I actually use that in teaching situations all the time. But that was fun, and just being alongside so many other great soloists. Like that band at times, some of the other guys would be Jimmy Green, Walter Smith, Jeremy Pelt, Tyrone Chase playing guitar, just really guys who, I'm still in touch with, but who are, sort of at the heights of their careers and visibility now, and it's really neat to play. It's neat to be in a band where you're playing constantly all the time, but it's also fun when you're taking one or two solos a night and just doing a lot of listening. There's a lot of lessons that we learn by playing, and I think about this a lot because I'm in education a lot, but I do think there's something about learning to play this music particularly that you can't shortchange or shortcut time. There's a constancy that's needed, even if there's not any instruction being given or lessons that one could write down. Just doing it again and again. It's part of the DNA of how people learn to improvise or play or phrase. Just any situation, even if you're not, it doesn't even have to be a band that works and performs and travels. It could be a bunch of kids that get together all the time and play at someone's house. But that constancy and that regularity, I think that's such a key piece, and it's what all of us musicians are going for out there, fighting. I think it's why we fight for visibility and wider audiences, because we want to be able to do what we do more often.
Absolutely. So let me ask you this. You talked about kind of going into a reversion where you've gotten into Charlie Parker and a lot of people that you didn't in the beginning. And you've been pretty clear about who your influences are. It says that, you were channeling, Parker and Young and Mingus and Ellington and Rollins and Coltrane and all kinds of people in this album. So let me ask you this. If you could get into a time machine and see maybe one or two people in the history of jazz, who would you go see live and where would you go?
And I'll forget all this stuff about, when people travel through time, they eventually mess everything up and like the whole world falls apart, right?
Yeah, but
we've all seen the movie, so you can't, but
and I was talking about that with a friend the other day, and when McFly went back to fix his folks, everything fell apart. But for some reason, this question, it's like a crystal bubble. Nothing gets affected. You're not even in the room. You're invisible. You're like a hologram from Star Trek.
Awesome. Okay. First, let me think. I would definitely see Bird. I would definitely see, Charlie Parker, just because mean, chiefly I just want to hear his tone, because the recording fidelity when he was making records, some of it is not bad, but it's not as good as it would be just a few decades later. And I just have the sense that I love his sound, but that I would love it even more if I heard, if I stood next to him. And there's something, and other musicians of other instruments might roll their eyes at this next comment, but there really is something about alto saxophone that's at times hard to capture in recording. I am all the time hearing folks, maybe players around modern days. I can't think of examples off the top of my head, but I'm all the time hearing alto players live where I'm just absolutely blown away by their tones. Oh, it's such a beautiful sound, and then on the record it just doesn't translate. So I would definitely see Parker. Gosh, I mean, what wouldn't you want to see? I'd love to see Clifford Brown. I'd love to see, obviously, Coltrane's band. That's such a iconic band. I'd love to see what it was like. There's Lester Young, as I mentioned before, such a favorite, and I suppose again the recording technology of the time not only limits the sound but limits the length of solos. So where when you're checking out most recordings, especially early Lester Young, you're only hearing 16 bars at a time, and wouldn't it be great to go back and maybe be in Kansas City before those musicians even really traveled to New York and wider places, maybe, and hear them play where he would be taking really, really long solos. Hopefully, I think. I guess those would be two, but shoot, there'd be a lot of good things. Yeah.
Well, with the whole idea that the future could be messed up, maybe that's the idea for another screenplay. Back to the jazz, and you see enough to screw everything up, but enough to fix everything.
Yeah.
So let me ask you this: why do you love jazz?
Shoot, I think the 15 or 16-year-old version of myself would probably give a more interesting answer. I mean, by now I'm too far gone, and so it's too much a part of me. I'm sort of addicted to the point. I'm actually reading a book now, someone's autobiography, and there's a quote in just the part I just read that was really interesting, where he said, and this guy's not a musician, but he says, music is the ropes that tie together, the jumbled memories on my life's pickup truck. And he just meant that every piece of music he hears is tied up with, it evokes memories. It's sort of like, life concentrate or something, and that's certainly for me. I mean, by now all my friendships and everything is kind of tied up in this music, so it's hard to say. But why did I like jazz at the beginning, when I had no history and it was just approaching me on its own merits? I think it sounded exciting and brave and adventurous. And I'm sure I liked the part, not just about it being improvised, but it being improvised collaboratively, right? Where you're only ever responsible for just but a part of it, and you might have ideas about where you want things to go, but you have to always kind of stay flexible, and when you have a few of those experiences with people, with friends of yours that you start to play with, and a few of those experiences where things could go anywhere and they end up going somewhere cool, and you went there together, that's sort of exhilarating and addictive. And so I think that's probably what got me at the beginning. I realized that those experiences probably could have been had in other ways, other genres, or even other things, and certain chance involved in what makes someone fall in love with something or someone. So
right on.
It's mysterious.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So let me ask you this. This is my final question. Everyone has a version of who you are: your family, your friends, your students. and everybody that listens to your music, but who do you think you are? When you wake up every day, who do you think you are?
Wow, this is a really potent question. I think I am, anyway.
Who do you think you are?
I'm leading the ship. Well, I'm not saying I hope I would learn to see myself, someone a child of God and someone who's being led by things bigger and outside himself. I suppose in any given moment, I would probably, literally, if you're saying like waking up, like I'm probably hoping that like right now I'm on vacation with my family, so I'm thinking, I'm dad and husband and just, enjoying time, but, maybe, with my students, I'm hoping, I think you're always kind of like, fighting for the parts of yourself that you feel are being forgotten or overlooked. So maybe when I'm, just been with students for a long time, I'm sort of inwardly fighting to be known as and be thought of as a performer, and then vice versa. And once I get away from that for a while, I just want to, talk to people about how my students and how great they are. Ideally, I'm trying not. I was just actually talking with my son about this. I'm trying not to worry too much about, fame or notoriety in any of those worldly ways, and just kind of trust and be known by gratitude for what I have, and that's what I'm going for anyway. And
right on.
That counts for something.
I do, yes, without a doubt. I think that's a great way to wrap everything up. Kris, Thank you for opening up your story to me and giving me your time today. I appreciate it.
Hey, it's my pleasure talking to you. Thanks, Joe.
Thanks for listening and tuning in to yet another Neon Jazz interview, where we give you a bit of insight into the finest players in New York, Kansas City, Connecticut, and spots all over the world, giving fans all that jazz. And thanks to Kris for his his music, and all of those stories. If you want to hear more interviews, go to Famous Interviews with Joe Domino on the iTunes Store, or visit theneonjazz.blogspot.com for all things Neon Jazz. Until next time, enjoy the music, my friends.
Neon Jazz.